What if the people who should love you most chose someone else instead? What if your sister was praised as a genius while you were cast aside, and then you discovered her brilliance was nothing but a lie? And what if, after dying once, you woke to live it all again, holding the power to expose her? Would you stay silent or burn the truth into the light? The day my sister was crowned, I woke from death. The night my sister declared herself a genius was the night I realized I was no longer bound to the laws of time. The air was thick with the sound of applause, my father's hands slamming the table in pride, my mother's sobs of joy as if they had been gifted a treasure from heaven. My sister stood there glowing, waving a piece of paper she claimed proved she had achieved a near-perfect score in the exam that would decide her future. 680. A number so sharp it cut through the air like a blade. The room swelled with pride, and in the corner I stood in silence, my hands cold, my heart unsteady, because I had seen this exact moment before. I was not supposed to be alive to witness it again. I had died, alone, discarded, and forgotten by the same family now shining their love upon her. My body had been broken at the foot of the staircase, my breath stolen by silence, while on the other side of the wall, my parents whispered comfort to their younger daughter. And yet here I was, back again in the very moment where it all began, watching the charade unfold exactly as before. The question that tore through my mind was not how, but why. Why had I been given this chance to return, to stand once more at the precipice of everything that had destroyed me? And what was I meant to do with it? There, in the shadows of my parents' pride, I understood the cruel irony. My sister's fabricated score, that shimmering number on her lips, was not a triumph. It was a weapon. It was the small spark that would ignite every lie, every betrayal, every collapse that followed. It was the key to both her rise and my ruin. And now it was in my hands to decide whether history would repeat itself or not. The world believed her without question. My father laughed so loudly the windows rattled. My mother clutched her child as if the universe itself had chosen to bless her womb. And me, I was reduced to silence, the shadow at the edge of their golden light. But inside me, another voice stirred. I remembered the truth. I remembered her real scores, the mediocrity hidden behind the mask. I remembered the cruelty of being accused of jealousy when I spoke the truth. I remembered the bitterness of watching my parents gamble their dignity at government offices, demanding justice for a fraud. And most of all, I remembered the final betrayal, when they chose to hold her hand instead of mine as I gasped for breath in the dark. Now imagine standing in a room where everyone is laughing, crying, celebrating, while you alone carry the knowledge that it is all built on sand. Would you speak? Would you tear away the veil? Or would you play along, watching the performance until it consumes itself? That was the question that settled in my chest as I forced my lips into a smile. They called her prodigy, miracle, savior of the family. They called me bitter, envious, useless. But if you had seen what I had seen, lived what I had lived, you would know that this celebration was not the beginning of her glory. It was the beginning of her downfall. And for me, it was the beginning of a second life. This is not a story of jealousy. It is a story of clarity, of what it means to stand on the edge of truth while the people you love drown themselves in illusion. It is a story about the moment I chose to stop begging for their love and started preparing for their collapse. The applause that night was thunderous, but to me it sounded like the ticking of a clock, counting down to the inevitable. The paper she waved in her hand, the number she announced, was not just a score. It was the thread that would unravel the tapestry of lies she had woven. And now that I held the memory of my previous death, I knew exactly where to pull. You want to know how a family can shatter? Watch what happens when truth collides with blind devotion. You want to know how far a sister will go to expose betrayal? Listen closely, because this is where it begins. I stood in that room, my heart steadying, my mind sharper than ever before. They thought I was defeated, a ghost in my own home. But I had returned with purpose. The game had restarted, the pieces set on the board, and I alone knew the ending they could not see. And as my sister's voice rang with triumph, I whispered silently to myself, This time, I will not lose. The moment she declared her impossible score, my family believed they had won a victory for the ages. They did not know they had just fired the first shot in a war neither of us could walk away from. What happens when a lie grows too large to control? What happens when the truth, buried once before, claws its way back to the surface? That is the story you are about to hear. It does not end in celebration. It ends in revelation. And it begins here, with a sister's rebirth, a forged number, and a family too blind to see that the brightest light often burns out the fastest. Turning the crowd against her. They believed her without question. The number slipped from her lips like a spell, and my parents' faces lit as though the universe itself had smiled upon them. But I kept still, eyes lowered, not in submission but in calculation. For if I had been given this second life, it was not to play the victim again. It was to watch, to study, and to strike at the exact moment her lies began to rot. I started quietly, not with confrontation, but with whispers woven into the fabric of the crowd beyond our home. A photograph of her desk scattered with books, pages scribbled in chaos. A snapshot of her colorful notes, more decoration than substance. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary, even charming. To those who had struggled through long nights of study, it reeked of pretense. I pressed upload under the mask of a new account and waited. At first, the comments came like playful raindrops. A few doubters, a few admirers. But then the questions sharpened. How could she know her exact score before the official announcement? How did her results leap so far from her past performance? Was this really the study corner of a genius, or the stage of a fraud? Each remark echoed through the silence I held in my chest. And yet, even as the doubts grew, the loyalty of my parents was unshaken. My mother praised her in public, her voice brimming with pride. My father laughed with colleagues, boasting of his daughter's brilliance. When I dared speak of truth, they looked at me not with curiosity, but with disdain, as if my words were poison. To them, I was the bitter sister, green with envy, trying to pull down the star they had chosen to worship. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that every lie, no matter how carefully crafted, leaves behind crumbs. And the hungrier the lie grows, the harder it is to feed. Wouldn't you wonder, listening now, how long she could balance on the edge of such a fragile illusion? How many cracks would it take before the mask shattered? The pressure was mounting. She could feel it too. One evening she turned to me, lips curved into a smile that was more of a snarl. "Sister," she said, "you've always fought with me, but the difference between us is written in the scores. Why not smile for me now? Or does it hurt too much?" The arrogance in her tone was sharp, but her eyes flickered. Just for a moment, with fear. She sensed it. She knew I was watching differently this time, and so I set the stage higher. I nudged a rumor here, planted a doubt there. I spoke in earshot of neighbors, mentioning her sudden rise in marks. Soon, the questions spread not only online but in the hallways of our lives. Teachers began to raise their brows. Old acquaintances whispered behind hands. And when an influential family sought tutoring for their daughter, it was my sister's name they requested. It should have been her moment of triumph. Instead, it was my perfect trap. Because what happens when a false idol is asked to perform before those who expect nothing but brilliance? What happens when the girl who has lived only on smoke and mirrors must face a pupil who demands real knowledge? I knew the answer already. I had seen her stumble in private, caught her evasion, heard her excuses, and this time I would make sure there were witnesses. Her refusal was immediate, loud, almost desperate. She claimed exhaustion, claimed she was too fragile, too unwell after the exams. My parents, as always, rushed to defend her. "She's worked so hard, don't pressure her," they said, casting accusing eyes at me as though I were the one cruel enough to demand sacrifice. But I didn't argue. I leaned in, voice low, sweet, convincing. "Just a few hours, for Father's sake. A little effort, and you'll bring honor to the family." Honor. That word had always been my father's weakness. I saw his expression shift, saw his silence turn to reluctant agreement. For the first time, he looked at me not with contempt, but with calculation. And so the cage tightened around her. Each excuse she gave sounded hollower than the last. Each delay only invited more suspicion. She could feel the walls closing in, and still she smiled. Still, she pretended to be untouchable. But the more she performed, the more I saw through her. The applause she once commanded now carried an undertone of unease. The very light she had stolen began to reveal the cracks in her mask. Let me pause here and extend a warm welcome to you all from Dran. If you are listening closely, you can sense where this story is heading. The tension is building, the lies stretching thin. If you want to journey with me further into this unraveling, do subscribe to Dran. Your support fuels the fire for more stories that cut this deep. Now ask yourself this. How far would you go to protect a lie? Would you sacrifice your dignity, your future, the love of those who believe in you? My sister already had her answer. She was willing to risk it all, to double down, to polish her fraud until even she could no longer tell where the truth ended and the illusion began. But here's the truth I carried like a blade at my side. I was no longer the obedient daughter, no longer the silent sibling. I was the one person in the room who had seen the ending once before, and this time, I was not afraid to cut the thread. The world outside was beginning to ask questions, but inside my house, the walls remained thick with blind devotion. My parents saw no danger, no deceit. They saw only a daughter who promised them glory. What they didn't see was the storm gathering, the eyes of strangers turning, the questions piling like storm clouds ready to break. I had planted the seeds. They were growing. And soon my sister would be asked to stand not in the warmth of our parents' pride, but in the cold light of scrutiny. And there, stripped of protection, what would she have left? This was not yet the climax, not yet the fall. This was the moment before the storm, the tightening of the rope, the breath caught in the throat of the liar who knows the truth is coming. And as I watched her cling tighter to the illusion, I whispered again to myself the promise I had made from the start. This time, I will not lose. A sinister realization. It was during those long nights when the house finally fell silent that I began to notice the rhythm of her deception. She would lock herself in her room, claiming exhaustion, yet I could hear the restless shuffling of papers, the nervous pacing across the floorboards. When she emerged, her eyes glistened with something I recognized all too well. Not pride, not relief, but fear. And it was then that the impossible thought struck me. What if she, too, remembered? What if I wasn't the only one who had been dragged back into this cursed repetition of life? The notion crawled into my mind like a spider. Impossible to shake off. It explained too much. The extra hesitation before showing her results, the way she avoided celebrating too loudly, as if aware of where the performance had once gone wrong. Even the sudden production of that pristine admission letter, conveniently timed and almost too polished, screamed of foresight. She wasn't improvising. She was correcting the script. Tell me, what would you do if the very enemy you swore to expose turned out to have traveled through death with you? Would you confront them? Or would you stay silent, watching to see how far they would go when given a second chance? I chose silence, but it was a silence sharp enough to cut. One evening, I found myself alone in her room, the place my parents treated as a shrine. Her desk sat by the window, lit by the last golden light of day. Her notebooks lay open, filled with neat handwriting and brightly colored highlights. At first glance, it was the portrait of diligence. But I knew the truth. These pages were copied word for word from textbooks, a performance for anyone foolish enough to peek inside. I traced my finger over the ink, almost laughing. How many people would look at this and call it genius? How many would be fooled again? And yet, as I stood there, an unease pressed against my chest. If she was rewriting her path, then what about mine? Was I only reacting to her moves, trapped in a dance I had already lost once before? The thought was unbearable. I had to shift the balance. The chance came sooner than I expected. My father returned home, cheeks flushed with cheap liquor, boasting of how his colleagues envied him. "My daughter," he roared, "a future scholar. They'll have to respect me now." He slapped the table, eyes blazing with pride. My sister, sitting beside him, smiled demurely, but her hand gripped her glass too tightly. I caught the flicker of panic in her eyes, and in that flicker, I saw it. She wasn't invincible. She knew the rope was fraying. Later that night, she cornered me in the hallway. Her face was calm, almost tender, but her words slithered with venom. "You know, don't you?" she whispered. "You've always known. But tell me, sister, why haven't you said anything yet? Why let me play my game if you hate me so much? The air between us crackled, heavy with unsaid truths. I looked at her, really looked, and for a moment I saw not just the arrogant liar, but the terrified child beneath. She wanted to control the narrative, to outsmart fate itself. But she also needed me, to stay quiet, to play along. And that need gave me power. What would you do in my place? Reveal her secret and watch her crumble, or hold it close, letting her believe she was still in control, while you slowly built the trap around her? I chose the latter, because power isn't always about speaking first. Sometimes it's about waiting until silence is louder than any scream. From that night on, our exchanges shifted. She stopped sneering openly, choosing instead to test me with barbed comments, to study my reactions as though I were her exam. And I, in turn, became the mirror she could not decipher. When she gloated, I smiled. When she accused, I nodded. When she hinted at the past, I gave her nothing. The more uncertain she grew, the more desperate her performance became. Small cracks began to appear. During a tutoring session with the daughter of one of my father's superiors, she faltered, unable to answer basic questions. She stormed out, cheeks burning, leaving my father humiliated. My mother rushed to defend her, blaming the heat, the pressure, anything but the truth. But behind the closed door, I could hear her muffled sobs. She knew the image was slipping, and yet she clung to it with bleeding fingers. The revelation came to me like lightning. She wasn't lying for herself. She was lying for them, for our parents, for the fragile pride they had built on her shoulders. All these years, I had thought she was simply selfish, basking in the love that was denied me. But now, seeing her shake and tremble when the mask cracked, I understood. She was as trapped as I was. She wore the crown not because she earned it, but because they forced it upon her, and she was too afraid to set it down. Does that excuse her? Does fear absolve a liar of the destruction they cause? Or does it make the lie even more damning, because it was never born of ambition, but of cowardice? I didn't have the answer then, and perhaps I never will. What I did know was this. Fear makes people dangerous. Fear makes them cling to their illusions even as they drown. And so the tension between us thickened into something unspeakable. We were no longer sisters bound by blood. We were adversaries bound by fate. Both reborn, both carrying the weight of memory, both desperate not to repeat the ending we already knew. It was a battle neither of us could avoid, because in the end, there was only room for one truth. The question now was simple, though the answer was anything but. Who would break first? Would it be her, cornered by the weight of her lies, or me, crushed under the burden of my silence? The house, the family, even our futures, it all trembled on that knife's edge, and every day I woke knowing the blade was cutting deeper. The banquet that became a trial. The night of the banquet shimmered with gold and laughter, but beneath the glitter, the air was heavy with something far more sinister. Chandeliers bathed the hall in warm light, tables groaned under the weight of delicacies, and my sister stood poised at the center like a crowned queen. Every eye adored her, every voice praised her, and my mother beamed with a pride so blinding that it could have lit the room without the lamps. To them, this was the celebration of triumph. To me, it was the stage for a reckoning. I had prepared everything with precision. The hidden camera placed at the corner of the hall, the live stream link already active, the subtle whispers I had seeded online days before. It wasn't about exposing her in the privacy of our home. No, this had to be public, undeniable, a mirror held so high that even my parents' willful blindness could not ignore it. But even as I sat there, hands folded in my lap, my heart pounded. Because the truth is, when you set a trap, you are never entirely sure who will fall into it, or how violently they will break when they do. The evening unfolded with rehearsed perfection. My sister took the stage, her voice trembling with feigned humility, thanking our parents for their endless support. Her eyes glistened with carefully timed tears. Guests sighed with admiration. Some even applauded mid-speech. And for a fleeting moment, I felt a shiver of doubt. What if she succeeded again? What if, even in this life, her lie outshone my truth? Then the screen flickered. At first, a ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. The slideshow of family photos disappeared, replaced by the raw feed of my live stream. The comments began to crawl across the giant display, sharp, Merciless. Fraud. Fake. Lies. People dissected her forged admission letter, pointing out every inconsistency, every careless detail. A gasp spread through the hall, swift and brutal. My sister froze, her face draining of color, her words caught in her throat. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. And then chaos erupted. Guests turned to one another in disbelief, some murmuring, others outright laughing at the audacity. My father's glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the marble floor. My mother sprang to her feet, voice shrill with denial, demanding the screen be shut off. But the truth was already alive, flashing before hundreds of eyes, both in the hall and across the internet. And just when it seemed the humiliation was enough, the final twist arrived. The grand doors of the banquet hall swung open, and uniformed officers stepped inside. Their presence cut through the noise like a blade. The lead officer's voice was calm, steady, but every syllable landed like a hammer. The admission letter was counterfeit, purchased illegally, and the investigation had already uncovered proof of her involvement. Panic spread like fire. My sister stumbled back, shaking her head, insisting it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. My mother rushed to shield her, shouting at the officers, accusing them of targeting an innocent child. But their words carried no weight. The guests who had praised her moments before now recoiled, whispering venom. Some demanded their gifts back. Others sneered about being deceived into attending. The hall was no longer a banquet. It was a courtroom, and the verdict was unanimous. I should have felt triumph. I should have felt the cold satisfaction of victory. Yet as I watched my sister crumble, sobbing, clutching at my mother's dress like a child, something inside me twisted. Was this justice? Or was it cruelty? Had I exposed her lies? Or had I destroyed the only fragile scaffolding she had left to cling to? And the darker question followed, unrelenting. Would the world see her for the liar she was, or would they paint me as the merciless executioner of my own blood? The officers moved closer, their shadows falling over her trembling frame. The chatter of the guests rose, each word another stone thrown at her already fractured mask. My father sat in silence, his face ashen, unable to speak. The very man who had once boasted of his daughter's brilliance now looked as though the ground beneath him had collapsed. And in that moment, as the scene teetered between collapse and revelation, I realized something. Truth alone does not save you. It does not heal. It does not repair broken bonds. It only strips everything bare. And once the flesh of illusion is torn away, all that remains is bone, raw and ugly, impossible to ignore. If you followed me this far, you felt the tension building, the hope of justice clashing with the fear of devastation. And if this story grips you the way it grips me, then please, if you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like. It may seem like such a small action, but for us, it is a huge encouragement, the kind of spark that keeps us bringing you more stories just as raw, just as haunting, just as unforgettable. Because here's the truth. At that banquet, I wasn't just exposing her. I was exposing the entire house of cards my family had built, one lie stacked upon another. And as it all came tumbling down, I understood that there was no going back. Not for her, not for me, not for any of us. The hall rang with shouts and sobs, with accusations and desperate pleas. My sister was led away, her eyes wide with betrayal, her voice breaking as she begged for forgiveness she would never receive. My mother crumpled, torn between fury and despair, lashing out at anyone within reach. My father's silence grew heavier, the silence of a man who has lost not only his pride, but the illusion of control. And I stood there, calm, unflinching, watching as the storm I had summoned finally swallowed us whole. This was the climax. This was the moment the lie shattered under its own weight. But if you think this is the end, you are wrong. Because every storm leaves behind ruins, and in those ruins, choices must be made. What remains once the lies are stripped away? Who do we become when the masks are gone? Stay with me. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel. Your support is what allows us to go deeper, to unravel stories that cut to the bone. Because the truth, as you'll see, is never the ending. It is only the beginning. The last step away. When the banquet hall finally emptied, the air smelled of spilled wine, sweat, and shame. Broken glasses littered the floor, and the echoes of harsh words still clung to the walls. My sister was gone, taken away under the weight of her own falsehoods. My mother sat collapsed in a chair, her hands trembling as though they no longer belonged to her. My father stared blankly at the ground, a man hollowed out by humiliation. And I, standing in the doorway with my coat already on, felt something I had never felt before. Not victory, not triumph, but release. For so long I had thought that if only the truth came out, everything would change. That my parents would finally see me, finally recognize the years I had carried the burdens they placed on my shoulders. That maybe, once the lie was torn down, love would grow in the empty space it left behind. But watching them now, small and broken, I understood. Love does not sprout from ruins. It either lives in the soil from the beginning, or it never takes root at all. My mother raised her eyes to me then. For the first time in my memory, her gaze was soft, pleading. She whispered promises she had never whispered before. I'll give you what you deserve. I'll love you the way I should have. Just don't leave me. Not now. Her words, if they had been spoken to the girl I once was, would have been enough to undo me. But I was no longer that girl. I was the woman who had seen death, who had lived the silence of abandonment, who had learned that love forced at the edge of despair is not love at all. It is desperation. So I stepped back. My silence was answer enough. Her lips trembled, her tears fell, but I did not reach out to wipe them away. Some bonds are broken so early, so thoroughly, that no apology can sew them together again. And in that moment, I knew my story with this family was finished. The taxi waiting outside hummed quietly, its headlights cutting through the night. My suitcase was already in the trunk, packed with the essentials I would need for the life waiting beyond this city. The driver glanced at me through the mirror, as though he could sense the gravity of the departure. "Airport?" he asked softly. I nodded, and with that, the car pulled away, carrying me not just to a plane, but to a future I would choose for myself. As the city lights blurred past the window, my chest ached. Not with regret, but with something far more tender. A mourning for the child I had once been, who had begged for scraps of affection, who had worked herself raw for a smile that never came. That girl had died once on a staircase, blood pooling beneath her head while her parents comforted someone else. And tonight, she died again, but this time not from betrayal, not from neglect. Tonight, she died because I was finally ready to bury her and let the woman she became take her place. Is this what freedom feels like? It is not joy, not the soaring happiness I once imagined. It is quieter, heavier, like breathing clean air after years in a poisoned room. It is the strength to walk away without looking back. It is the knowledge that my worth is not measured by anyone's approval, but my own. And as the plane lifted into the night sky hours later, carrying me toward a continent far away, I pressed my forehead against the window and whispered a promise to myself: never again. Never again will I waste years chasing the love of those who cannot give it. Never again will I bleed just to keep someone else comfortable. If love comes to me in this new life, it will be because I am seen, wholly and without condition. If family is ever mine again, it will be chosen, not assigned by birth. To those who listen now, perhaps you too know what it is to hunger for love in a place where it does not exist. Perhaps you too have begged at doors that never opened. If so, hear me. You are not unworthy because they could not love you. Their blindness does not diminish your light. Sometimes, survival itself is the greatest rebellion. Sometimes, walking away is not weakness, but the purest act of strength. The past will always echo. I know there will be days when the memories return. The banquet, the humiliation, the look in my sister's eyes as she was led away, the trembling in my mother's voice. But echoes fade. And I have chosen to step into a world where their voices cannot dictate who I am anymore. So if you are standing at the threshold of a choice, unsure whether to cling or to let go, remember this: you do not owe anyone your silence, your suffering, or your life. What you owe yourself is freedom. What you owe yourself is peace. And in the quiet hum of the plane, with the stars spread wide above me, I realized that peace was finally mine. This then is the end of that chapter. The end of lies, the end of chains. But it is not the end of me. It is only the beginning. In the end, this was never a story about exam scores or forged documents. It was about what lies beneath the fragile fabric of family, about the weight of love given unequally, about the wounds carved when affection becomes conditional. My sister's downfall was spectacular, yes, but her tragedy was not only in the lies she told, it was in the desperation that drove her to keep telling them. And my liberation was not only in exposing her, but in finally finding the strength to stop begging for a place in a home that had never been mine. What this journey reveals is something painfully human, the longing to be seen, to be valued, to be loved without condition. Many of us have carried that hunger, whether from parents, partners, or friends. Some of us spend years twisting ourselves into shapes to earn affection until we forget who we were to begin with. But the truth is, love that must be earned is not love. Affection given only to one child, one sibling, or one partner while another starves for it, that is not love either. It is a performance, one that leaves scars deeper than any wound to the body. So what is the lesson here? It is this. You do not need to prove your worth to those who refuse to see it. You do not need to break yourself to keep someone else whole. Walking away does not make you cruel. It makes you free. If there are people in your life who only value you for what you provide, not who you are, then the most courageous act is to choose yourself instead of them. It will hurt. It may feel like tearing away a part of your own heart. But on the other side of that pain lies clarity, dignity, and peace. And how can we apply this today in our own lives? Ask yourself, where are you still chasing after approval that will never come? Who are you still trying to convince of your worth? The moment you recognize those patterns is the moment you can begin to free yourself. Pour your time, your energy, your love into those who reflect it back, not those who drain it away. Build families out of trust and loyalty, not just blood. And most of all, remember that the story of your life is yours to write, not theirs. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the sting of recognition in its words, I warmly invite you to join the Dran community. There, we continue to share more stories that cut to the bone, tales of struggle, resilience, betrayal, and rebirth. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to this channel. It may seem like a small action, but for us, it is the fire that keeps us bringing you the kind of powerful, unforgettable stories you deserve.